A blood-curdling scream echoes through Abbey Grange. Sir Eustace Brackenstall is dead. Struck down in his own home, but was it a ruthless burglar or a secret buried in this manor's heart? Holmes uncovers a hidden truth assailer, Captain Crocker. Linked to Lady Brackenstall's past, did he kill to save her from a tyrant, or is he hiding a darker purpose? Holmes hunts the fugitive through London's shadows, where confessions ignite a storm of loyalty and betrayal. But will the truth free them or deliver a final, devastating blow? The truth lies in the shadows. Chapter 1. The urgent summons. It was a morning in the winter of 1897, when the air of London hung heavy with frost and the streets were cloaked in a spectral mist, that I found myself roused from slumber by an uncommon disturbance. My bedroom, at Baker Street, usually a sanctuary of quiet at such an hour, was invaded by the tall, lean figure of Sherlock Holmes, who stood at the foot of my bed with an air of suppressed agitation. His grey eyes, sharp and penetrating, gleamed with that peculiar fire which I had come to associate with the scent of a problem worthy of his singular faculties. The dim light filtering through the ice-etched window cast his aquiline features into stark relief, lending him the aspect of some restless spirit conjured from the fog itself. "Watson," said he, in a voice low but urgent, "I must beg your indulgence for this intrusion, but a matter of grave import has arisen. A telegram has reached me not half an hour ago from Kent, bearing tidings of a crime at Abbey Grange. Sir Eustace Brackenstall lies dead, struck down in his own home, and Inspector Stanley Hopkins, whom you may recall from the affair of the golden pince-nez, implores our immediate assistance. The train departs Victoria Station at 8 o'clock, and we have but little time to prepare." The abruptness of his summons, coupled with the mention of murder, banished all traces of sleep from my mind. I rose at once, my pulse quickening at the prospect of adventure, for though I had shared many such undertakings with Holmes, each new case carried with it a fresh thrill of anticipation. "What are the particulars?" I asked, as I hastened to dress, my fingers fumbling with buttons in the chill of the room. Holmes, already clad in his travelling cloak and deerstalker, stood by the hearth in our sitting room, where a small fire struggled against the morning's cold. He held the telegram in his hand, its edges curling slightly from the warmth of his grip. "The details are sparse," he replied, as is often the case with such hasty communications. Sir Eustace was discovered lifeless in his dining room. At midnight, his skull shattered by a blow of considerable force. The household, I am told, comprises his wife, Lady Brackenstall, a butler named Crocker, a cook, and 2 maids. Hopkins suspects a burglary, for a window was found, forced, and a silver candlestick is missing. But his wire hints at some perplexity beyond the obvious. He is a promising officer, Watson, with a commendable instinct for when a matter exceeds the commonplace, but I fear this case may test even his mettle. I joined him in the sitting room, where the familiar clutter of our quarters Holmes's chemical apparatus strewn across the table, the violin resting in its case, the shelves groaning under the weight of his scrapbooks, seemed oddly incongruous with the grim tidings we had received. Holmes lit his pipe, sending wreaths of blue smoke curling toward the ceiling, and I noted the tautness of his movements, the restless energy that betokened a mind already grappling with the unseen threads of the mystery. We spoke little as we gathered our things, for I knew from long experience that Holmes preferred to reserve his thoughts until the facts of a case were before him. My own mind, however, was alive with conjecture. Sir Eustace Brackenstall was A name I vaguely recalled from the society columns, a man of wealth and temper, whose estate in Kent was said to be a relic of Tudor grandeur. The notion of his violent end in so secluded a setting stirred my imagination, and I wondered what manner of foe could have struck such a blow. The clock upon the mantel chimed 7:30, and Holmes clapped his hands together with sudden decision. "Come, Watson, the game is afoot. We must not keep Hopkins waiting." We descended to the street, where the fog had thickened, muffling the clatter of hooves and the cries of newsboys. A hansom cab awaited us, its driver hunched against the cold, and we rattled through the waking city to Victoria Station. The platform was a chaos of steam and bustle, but Holmes, with his unerring instinct for efficiency, secured a first-class carriage, and we settled into its plush confines as the train lurched southward. The journey to Kent was one of contrasts, the grime of London giving way to fields blanketed in snow, their whiteness unbroken save for the occasional track of a hare or the skeletal outline of a hedgerow. Holmes sat opposite me, his long legs stretched out, his eyes fixed upon the passing landscape, though I knew his thoughts were far from the pastoral scene without. His fingers, restless as ever, toyed with the telegram, folding and unfolding it with mechanical precision. I ventured to break the silence, hoping to draw him out. "What manner of man was Sir Eustace, do you suppose?" I asked. "The papers have painted him as something of a tyrant, if memory serves." Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile, though his gaze remained distant. "The papers, Watson, are a poor substitute for observation. Sir Eustace was indeed a man of note or notoriety, depending upon one's perspective. His wealth derives from coal mines in the north, and his marriage to Lady Brackenstall, an Australian heiress, was much discussed some years ago. He was a man of robust appetites, given to drink and to fits of temper, if rumour is to be believed. But rumour, like the press, is an unreliable witness. We shall form our own conclusions when we reach Abbey Grange." His words, though measured, carried a weight of implication, and I sensed that he was already constructing a mental portrait of the dead man. Piecing together fragments of hearsay and deduction, I pressed him further. "And the burglary, do you think it likely?" Holmes shrugged, a gesture at once dismissive and enigmatic. "A forced window and a missing candlestick suggest it, but appearances are seldom to be trusted. Burglars are a prosaic lot, Watson, and rarely resort to murder, unless cornered. Yet the blow that felled Sir Eustace was no accident. It speaks of intent, or at the very least, of desperation. Hopkins's unease tells me there is more here than meets the eye. We shall see." The train slowed as we approached, and Holmes fell silent once more, his attention returning to the telegram. I took the opportunity to reflect upon our destination. Abbey Grange, I recalled, was a manor of considerable antiquity, its history steeped in the feuds and fortunes of Kentish gentry. The thought of such a place, with its dark timbers and ancient halls, now stained by violence, sent a shiver through me that had little to do with the cold. I wondered, too, about Lady Brackenstall, whose name had been linked with Sir Eustace's in whispers of discord. What role had she played in the night's tragedy, and what secrets might her grief conceal? As the train steamed onward, the landscape grew wilder, the fields giving way to dense copses and rolling hills. The snow, which had been a mere dusting in London, lay thick here, transforming the countryside into a tableau of eerie stillness. I glanced at Holmes, whose face was now set in that mask of concentration I knew so well. His eyes, half closed, seemed to peer inward, as though he were already pacing the rooms of Abbey Grange, sifting through clues yet unseen. I envied him his clarity of thought, for my own mind was a jumble of questions without answers. At length, the train drew into a small station, its platform dusted with snow and flanked by a cluster of cottages. A carriage awaited us, its driver muffled in a greatcoat, and we set off along a winding road bordered by bare oaks. The air was sharp, biting at my face, and I drew my scarf tighter as we jolted toward our destination. Holmes, impervious too. The cold, leaned forward, his gaze fixed upon the road ahead. "Abbey Grange lies some 3 miles hence," he remarked. "We shall arrive shortly before noon, if this nag does not falter. Hopkins will have secured the scene, but I trust he has not trampled the evidence beyond redemption." His tone was light, but I detected a trace of impatience, as though he begrudged every moment that separated him from the heart of the mystery. I nodded, content to let him muse, and turned my attention to the passing scenery. The road climbed gently, affording glimpses of the manor through gaps in the trees. Abbey Grange was a formidable pile, its gabled roofs and chimneys rising like a fortress against the sky. Its walls, weathered by centuries, seemed to brood over the surrounding parkland, and I fancied that the snow lent it an air of mournful grandeur, as though it mourned its master's fate. As we drew nearer, the carriage slowed, and I caught sight of a figure pacing the driver, young man in a police greatcoat, his breath visible in the frigid air. It was Inspector Stanley Hopkins, whose boyish features belied a mind of considerable acumen. He hastened to meet us as we alighted, his expression a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank God you're here," he said, grasping Holmes's hand. "This is a devil of a case, and I'm at my wit's end. Sir Eustace was a man with enemies, and his household is a nest of secrets. I've done what I can to preserve the scene, but I need your eyes on it." Holmes's face betrayed no emotion, but his eyes flickered with interest. "Lead on, Hopkins," said he, "and spare no detail, however trivial it may seem." Hopkins nodded and gestured toward the manor, whose great oak door stood ajar, revealing a hall of shadowed grandeur. As we crossed the threshold, I felt a prickle of unease, as though the house itself were watching us, its silence heavy with unspoken truths. The air within was cold, despite the fires that burned in every grate, and the scent of old wood and wax hung about us like a memory. Hopkins led us through the hall, its walls hung with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, and into a corridor that opened onto the dining room. The chamber was vast, its ceiling ribbed with blackened beams, its walls clad in oak panels that gleamed dully in the firelight. A long table, set with crystal and silver, dominated the room, and at its far end, near a great stone fireplace, lay a dark stain upon the carpet, the mute witness to Sir Eustace's end. A poker, its end encrusted with blood, rested against the hearth, and a French window stood slightly ajar, admitting a breath of icy air. "The body has been removed to the village mortuary," said Hopkins, "but this is where he was found. Just after midnight, Lady Brackenstall discovered him and raised the alarm. The butler, Crocker, was first on the scene, followed by the maids. The window was forced, as you'll see, and a candlestick one of a pair is gone. We've searched the grounds and found footprints in the snow leading to the road, but no trace of the thief." Holmes nodded, his eyes already roving over the room, taking in every detail with that relentless scrutiny that was his hallmark. He crossed to the window, his lens in hand, and examined the frame with minute care. The latch is barely scratched, he murmured, almost to himself, and the snow outside trampled, but the prints are indistinct. He turned to the fireplace, kneeling to study the poker and the bloodstain, his fingers hovering over the carpet as though tracing an invisible pattern. "What of Lady Brackenstall?" he asked, rising abruptly. "Where is she now?" "In her sitting room," replied Hopkins. "She's in a pitiable state, shocked and bruised about the face. She says Sir Eustace struck her earlier that evening during one of his rages." Holmes's eyes narrowed, and I saw a flicker of something, anger perhaps, or pity cross his face. "We must speak with her at once," he said, "and Crocker too. Their accounts will be the cornerstone of this inquiry." Hopkins led us from the dining room through a maze of corridors hung with tapestries and lit by flickering lamps. The house seemed to close in around us, its silence broken only by the creak of floorboards and the distant moan of the wind. I glanced at Holmes, whose face was now a mask of concentration, his mind no doubt racing ahead, piecing together the fragments of the tragedy. For my part, I felt a growing sense of foreboding, as though the truth we sought lay buried beneath layers of deception, waiting to be unearthed by Holmes's unearthing hand as we approached Lady Brackenstall's sitting room. I steeled myself for what lay ahead, knowing that the tale we were about to hear would cast new light upon the darkness of Abbey Grange. The adventure had begun, and I could only hope that justice, in whatever form it took, would not be long in following. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime, the great oak door of Abbey Grange, swung inward with a groan, admitting us into a hall where the weight of centuries seemed to press upon the air. The manor, with its blackened timbers and high vaulted ceiling, exuded an aura of solemnity, as though it mourned the violence that had so lately disturbed its ancient peace. Inspector Stanley Hopkins led the way, his boots echoing on the flagstones, while Sherlock Holmes and I followed, our senses alert to the subtle cues that such a place might yield. The chill of the winter day clung to the walls, despite the fire that crackled in a massive hearth, and the faint scent of beeswax and old leather hung about us, mingling with the sharper tang of recent tragedy. Hopkins, his youthful face taut with the strain of the case, spoke in a low voice as we passed through the hall. "The dining room is this way, Mr. Holmes. I've kept the household away from it, save for the initial statements, and the local constables have been instructed to touch nothing. You'll find it much as it was when Lady Brackenstall raised the alarm." Holmes nodded, his eyes darting about, taking in the portraits that glowered from the wall's stern, men and women in ruffled collars, their gazes fixed upon some distant horizon. "A prudent measure, Hopkins," he said. "The scene of a crime is a delicate canvas, easily marred by careless hands." "What of the body?" "Removed to the village mortuary, as I mentioned," replied Hopkins. "The coroner's inquest is set for tomorrow, but I wanted your opinion before the evidence grows cold. Sir Eustace was struck down by the fireplace, and the weapon poker is still there. You'll see the blood yourself." We turned into a corridor, its walls hung with faded tapestries depicting scenes of hunt and harvest, and presently arrived at the dining. The chamber was a study in grandeur, its proportions vast yet somber, dominated by a long oak table that gleamed under the light of a chandelier. Heavy curtains of damask-framed tall windows, one of which a French window giving on to the lawn stood slightly ajar, admitting a breath of icy air that stirred the papers upon a sideboard. At the far end of the room, a great stone fireplace roared, its flames casting flickering shadows across the panelled walls. Near the hearth, A dark, irregular stain disfigured the rich pile of the carpet, marking the spot where Sir Eustace Brackenstall had met his end. Beside it lay the poker, its iron head crusted with blood, a mute testament to the violence of the deed. Holmes paused at the threshold, his lean figure silhouetted against the firelight, and I saw his eyes sweep the room with that relentless scrutiny that was his hallmark. He made no move to enter at once, but stood as though absorbing the scene, his head tilted slightly, his fingers steepled before him. I knew this posture well. It was the prelude to his method, the moment when his mind began to weave order from chaos. An imposing room, he remarked at length, his voice soft but resonant, and a stage well set for tragedy. Tell me, Hopkins, the sequence of events as you understand them. Hopkins cleared his throat, consulting a small notebook. Lady Brackenstall retired early last night, around 10 o'clock, after a quarrel with her husband. Sir Eustace remained here, drinking heavily, as was his custom. Just after midnight, she came downstairs to fetch a book from the library which adjoins this room. She entered and found him lying there, by the fire, his head crushed. She screamed, and the butler, Crocker, who was in his pantry nearby, rushed in. He found the window forced and the candlestick missing, one of a pair that stood upon the mantel. The maids and cook were roused by the commotion, but they saw nothing of note. I arrived at 2 in the morning and found the scene as you see it now, save for the body. Holmes nodded, his gaze fixed upon the bloodstain, and the window. You say from within or without? Without, by the look of it, said Hopkins. The latch is bent, and there are scratches on the frame. We found footprints in the snow outside, leading from the window to the road, but there muddled too many people tramped about before I could cordon it off. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint grimace, though whether at the clumsiness of the local police or the complexity of the case, I could not tell. He crossed to the French window, his movements swift yet deliberate, and knelt to examine the frame with his lens. The glass glinted coldly as he traced the latch, his fingers hovering over the metal as though reading some hidden script. Curious, he murmured. The scratches are superficial, and the latch is bent but not broken. A determined burglar would have made shorter work of it. He pushed the window wider, peering out at the snow-covered lawn, where a confusion of tracks marked the otherwise pristine surface. The footprints are indeed indistinct, he said, but not entirely without character. There is purpose in their disorder. Rising, he returned to the fireplace, where the poker lay. He did not touch it, but crouched low, his lens glinting, as he studied the bloodied end and the surrounding carpet. The stain was broad, its edges irregular, and I noted a faint smear leading toward the hearth, as though the body had been dragged a short distance. Holmes's eyes followed the same path, and he muttered something under his breath before turning to the mantel. The remaining candlestick, a heavy piece of silver wrought in the shape of a vine, stood alone, its twin conspicuously absent. A singular choice for a thief, said Holmes, lifting the candlestick and weighing it in his hand. Valuable, certainly, but cumbersome. Why take one and leave the other? And why strike a man down for so modest a prize? Hopkins shrugged, his frustration evident. Perhaps Sir Eustace surprised the intruder, and the fellow panicked. The poker was to hand, and he used it. Holmes set the candlestick down with care, his expression unreadable. Perhaps, he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. He paced the room, his long strides carrying him from the fireplace to the table, where he paused to examine the crystal decanter and glasses that stood upon a silver tray. The decanter was half empty, its contents a deep amber, and one glass bore traces of liquor, its rim smudged with fingerprints. "Sir Eustace's, I presume," said Holmes, holding the glass to the light. He drank alone, then, after his wife retired. A man in his cups is seldom a match for a determined assailant. He replaced the glass and turned to Hopkins. "What of the household's movements? Were they all abed save for Lady Brackenstall and Crocker?" Hopkins nodded. "The maids Mary and Teresa share a room in the attic and heard nothing until the scream. The cook, Mrs. Allen, sleeps near the kitchen and claims she was asleep. Crocker was in his pantry polishing silver when he heard the alarm. He's a steady man, been with the family for years." "And Lady Brackenstall's condition?" asked Holmes, his voice sharpening. "You mentioned bruises." Hopkins hesitated, his face darkening. "She's in a bad way, Mr. Holmes. Her left cheek is marked, and her eye is swollen. She says Sir Eustace struck her during their quarrel. Something about her refusing to join him at dinner. He was a brute, by all accounts, and not shy with his fists when the drink took him." Holmes's eyes narrowed, and I saw a flicker of anger cross his face, swiftly suppressed. "A charming fellow," he said dryly. "We must see her at once." "Hopkins, her account is paramount, and I would hear it from her own lips." Hopkins led us from the dining room, back through the corridor, and up a broad staircase whose balustrade was carved with intricate vines. The house seemed to grow darker as we ascended, the light from the windows dimmed by the snow that continued to fall outside. My mind was awhirl with the details of the scene, the forced window, the missing candlestick, the bloodied poker, and I wondered what Holmes made of it all. His silence was telling, for I knew he was already sifting through the facts, discarding the irrelevant and arranging the rest into some provisional pattern. As we reached the landing, a door opened, and a man emerged, a sturdy figure in a dark suit, his face weathered and his manner deferential. It was Crocker, the butler, whose steady gaze met ours with a mixture of curiosity and reserve. "Mr. Crocker," said Hopkins, "this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, come to assist with the inquiry." Crocker bowed slightly. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice deep and measured, "a terrible night, sirs. I'm at your service, should you need me." Holmes regarded him keenly, his eyes taking in every detail of the man's appearance. The calloused hands, the faint scar above his brow, the faint tremor in his stance. "We shall speak with you presently," said Holmes. "For now, please, ensure the household remains in their quarters." Crocker nodded and withdrew, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Holmes watched him go, his expression thoughtful. "A man of loyalty," he murmured, "but loyalty to whom?" Hopkins knocked at the door of Lady Brackenstall's sitting room, and a faint voice bade us enter. As we stepped inside, I braced myself for the interview that would, I felt certain, cast new light upon the mystery of Abbey Grange. The scene of the crime had spoken, but its tale was incomplete, and I trusted Holmes to unravel the rest. Chapter 3. The Lady's Tale. The door to Lady Brackenstall's sitting room opened upon a chamber of quiet elegance, its walls adorned with delicate wallpaper in a pattern of soft roses, its furnishings upholstered in pale silk that contrasted sharply with the somber mood of the house. A fire burned low in the grate, casting a feeble glow across the room, and through a tall window, the snow-laden parkland of Abbey Grange stretched away, its whiteness broken only by the dark silhouettes of ancient yews. Lady Brackenstall sat in a high-backed chair near the window, her figure framed against the wintry light, and as we entered, she rose with a grace that belied her evident distress. She was a woman of remarkable beauty, tall and fair, with hair the colour of ripe wheat and eyes of a deep, troubled blue. Yet her countenance was marred by a livid bruise upon her left cheek, its edges shading into purple, and a slight swelling about her eye that spoke of recent violence. Her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, trembled faintly, and her lips were set in a line of resolute composure, as though she had steeled herself for the ordeal of our interview. Inspector Stanley Hopkins introduced us with his usual deference, his voice tinged with sympathy. "Lady Brackenstall, this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson, come from London to assist in the matter of your husband's death. They have some questions, if you feel able to answer." She inclined her head, her gaze meeting Holmes's with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. "I am at your service, gentlemen," she said, her voice low and steady, though it carried the faint lilt of her Australian origins. "Please, be seated." We took the chairs offered, and I noted the simplicity of her attire, morning dress of black crepe, unadorned save for a single pearl brooch at her throat. Holmes, settling himself opposite her, leaned forward slightly, his manner gentle yet purposeful, as though he sought to pierce the veil of her composure without adding to her distress. "Madam," he began, his tone soft but incisive, "I am deeply sorry for your loss and for the circumstances that bring us here. The truth, however painful, is our only guide in such matters, and I must ask you to recount the events of last night with as much precision as you can muster. Leave nothing out, however trivial it may seem." Lady Brackenstall drew a deep breath, her fingers tightening on the arms of her chair. "I understand, Mr. Holmes," she said. "I will tell you all I know, though it is a wretched tale. My husband, Sir Eustace, was not himself yesterday. He had been drinking since the afternoon, as he often did, and by dinner his temper was foul. We dined alone, and he grew angry over some trifling matter. I cannot even recall what it was. He struck me," here she touched her bruised cheek, "and I left the table at once, retiring to my room before 10 o'clock. I could not bear his company any longer." Holmes's eyes, fixed upon her, betrayed no emotion, but I saw the slightest tightening of his jaw, a sign I knew to be a mark of his disapproval of such cruelty. "And after you retired," he prompted. "I tried to sleep," she continued, "but my mind was restless. I thought to read, hoping it might calm me. But the book I wanted, a volume of poetry, was in the library, which opens off the dining room. It must have been just after midnight when I came downstairs. The house was quiet, save for the creak of the stairs under my feet. I entered the dining room, meaning to pass through to the library, and then her voice faltered, and she pressed a hand to her lips, her eyes closing briefly. I saw him lying by the fire, his head broken, the blood pooling beneath him. I screamed, "Mr. Holmes!" I could not help it. The window was open, and I thought at once of burglars, for one of the silver candlesticks was gone from the mantel. I heard footsteps outside, crunching in the snow, and then Crocker, the butler, came running. He tried to revive Sir Eustace, but it was no use. He sent for the police, and I waited, too shocked to move. Holmes leaned back, his fingers steepled before him, his gaze never leaving her face. "You heard footsteps, you say. Did you see anyone outside the window?" She shook her head, her eyes dropping to her lap. "No, it was too dark. The snow was falling, and the lawn was shadowed by the trees. But I am certain I heard someone running, boots, I think, heavy and quick. And the candlestick," said "Holmes, you noticed its absence at once?" "Yes," she replied. "There were two upon the mantel, a gift from my father in Melbourne. One was missing, and I assumed the intruder had taken it." Holmes's expression remained impassive, but I sensed the quickening of his interest, as though some detail in her account had caught his attention. "Tell me of your husband's habits," he said. "Did he have enemies, men who might have wished him harm?" Lady Brackenstall hesitated, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. "Sir Eustace was not a gentleman, Mr. Holmes. His temper was known in the county, and his business dealings coal mines mostly made him rivals, though none I can name who would stoop to this. He was often harsh with the servants, and with me, but I know of no one who bore him such a grudge as to H.O." She trailed off, her voice breaking, and a tear slipped down her cheek, glistening in the firelight. Holmes's tone softened, though his eyes remained keen. "You have been most candid, madam, and I thank you. One final question. Had anything unusual occurred in the days leading up to last night? Visitors, letters, anything out of the ordinary?" She frowned, as though searching her memory. "Nothing remarkable," she said at last. "The household has been quiet, save for Sir Eustace's moods. We had no callers, and the post brought only the usual bills and invitations." Holmes rose, bowing slightly. "You have been most helpful, Lady Brackenstall. Pray rest now, and leave this matter to us. We shall disturb you no further unless it is necessary." She nodded, her face pale but composed, and we withdrew, following Hopkins back to the corridor. As the door closed behind us, Holmes's demeanor changed, his eyes gleaming with that intensity I knew to herald a breakthrough, however small. "She is concealing something, Watson," he said in a low voice as we descended the staircase. "Her story is coherent, yet there is a restraint in her manner, a shadow in her eyes that speaks of more than grief or fear." I glanced at him, puzzled. "You think she lies?" "Not lies, perhaps," he replied, "but omits. The footsteps she heard, the candlestick she noticed her account is too precise in some respects, too vague in others. A woman in shock does not observe the absence of a candlestick so readily, nor describe the sound of boots with such certainty, unless her mind is fixed upon them. There is a piece missing from her tale, and we must find it." Hopkins, who had been listening, looked troubled. "She suffered greatly, Mr. Holmes. Sir Eustace was a brute, and her bruises bear witness to it. Could it not be shock, as you say, clouding her memory?" Holmes's lips curved in a faint, enigmatic smile. "Shock, Hopkins, is a convenient cloak, but it does not account for the flicker of calculation I saw in her eyes. Let us speak with the butler, Crocker. His testimony may shed light where hers does not." We returned to the dining room, where Crocker awaited us, his sturdy frame standing rigidly by the sideboard. His face, weathered by years of service, was impassive, but his eyes held a wariness that did not escape Holmes's notice. As we prepared to question him, I felt the weight of the mystery deepen, the threads of truth tangling further with each word spoken. Lady Brackenstall's tale, though poignant, was but the first act in a drama whose conclusion remained hidden, and I trusted to Holmes's unerring instinct to guide us through the shadows of Abbey Grange. Chapter 4. The Butler's Account. The dining room of Abbey Grange, with its brooding oak panels and flickering firelight, seemed to close in around us as we prepared to question Crocker, the butler. The air was heavy with the lingering scent of tragedy, the blood stained by the hearth, a silent reminder of the violence that had shattered the manor's ancient calm. Inspector Stanley Hopkins stood by the French window, his notebook in hand, his youthful face etched with the strain of a case. That grew more perplexing with each revelation. Sherlock Holmes, his lean figure poised with that quiet intensity that marked his deepest engagement, fixed his gaze upon Crocker, who stood before us with the rigid bearing of a man accustomed to service, yet tempered by the night's horrors. I, too, watched the butler closely, my medical eye noting the faint tremor in his hands and the tight set of his jaw, signs of a mind under pressure, though whether from grief, fear, or something else, I could not yet discern. Crocker was a man of middle years, broad-shouldered and sturdy, with a face weathered by time and toil. His dark hair, streaked with grey, was neatly combed, and his black suit, though slightly worn at the cuffs, was immaculate, a testament to his professionalism even in the face of catastrophe. His eyes, a deep brown, met Holmes's with a steadiness that bordered on defiance, yet there was a flicker of unease in their depths, as though he anticipated the probing questions to come. "Mr. Crocker," began Holmes, his voice calm but edged with authority. "You are, I understand, the first to have reached the dining room after Lady Brackenstall's scream. Pray recount your movements last night, from the time her ladyship retired until the moment you discovered Sir Eustace's body." Crocker inclined his head, his voice deep and measured, with the faint burr of a Kentish accent. "Yes, sir. I was in my pantry, just off the kitchen, at about midnight. I'd been polishing the silverwares, a christening spoon needed for a family in the village, and I meant to have it ready. The house was quiet, as it usually is that late. Her ladyship had gone to her room early after dinner, and Sir Eustace was here, in the dining room, drinking alone. I heard nothing unusual until the scream. It was sharp, like a knife, and I knew it was her ladyship at once. I dropped what I was doing and ran here, through the corridor. When I came in, I saw her standing by the table, white as a ghost, and Sir Eustace lying there, by the fire, his head all broken. The window was open, and I heard boots crunching in the snow outside, getting fainter, like someone running off. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You heard footsteps, you say. How many sets, and what was their character?" Crocker frowned, as though recalling the moment with effort. "Just one set, sir, I'd say. Heavy boots, moving fast. I couldn't see anyone, it was dark, and the snow was falling thick, but the sound was clear enough, heading toward the lawn." "And what did you do next?" asked Holmes. "I went to Sir Eustace first, thinking he might still be alive," said Crocker, "but one look told me he was gone. The blood was everywhere, and his eyes, they were open, staring. I turned to her ladyship, who was trembling, and asked if she was hurt. She said no, but she was in a bad way, so I sent Teresa, the maid, for brandy from the sideboard. Then I noticed the window, forced open, and the candlestick missing from the mantel. I thought it must be a burglar, so I ran to the telephone in the hall and called the police. After that, I stayed with her ladyship until the constables arrived." Holmes's fingers drummed lightly on the arm of his chair, a sign of his mind at work. "You acted with commendable presence of mind, Crocker. Tell me, what was the state of the room when you entered? Beyond the body and the open window, did anything strike you as unusual?" Crocker hesitated, his eyes flicking briefly to the fireplace before returning to Holmes. "Not that I can say, sir. The decanter was on the table, with a glass beside it Sir Eustace had been drinking, as I said. The poker was by the hearth, where it always is, though I didn't see the blood on it till later. Everything else seemed in place, save for the candlestick. Holmes rose and paced slowly to the fireplace, his lens in hand, examining the poker with minute care. "This poker," he said, without looking up, "is a heavy instrument, well suited for its grim purpose. You say it was where it always is, by the hearth, I presume, in its stand." "Yes, sir," said Crocker. "It's kept there with the tongs and shovel. Sir Eustace sometimes used it to stir the fire himself when he was in his moods." Holmes nodded, his attention shifting to the bloodstain on the carpet and Sir Eustace's moods. "How would you describe them of late?" Crocker's jaw tightened, and for the first time, a flash of emotion, anger, perhaps, crossed his face. "He was a hard man, sir, and the drink made him harder. He'd been worse these past weeks, ever since a deal went sour with some mine. In Yorkshire he'd shout at the maids, curse the cook, and, well, he was cruel to her ladyship. I've seen her with bruises before, and it wasn't right, not for a lady like her." Holmes's eyes met Crocker's, and I saw a silent understanding pass between them, though what it signified I could not guess. "You are loyal to her ladyship," said Holmes, his tone neutral. "How long have you served this household?" 15 years, sir," replied Crocker. "I came here as under-butler when Sir Eustace's father was still alive. Her ladyship's been kind to us all, even when things were bad. She doesn't deserve what's happened." Holmes returned to his chair, his expression inscrutable. "One last question, Crocker. Did you see or hear anything earlier in the evening, any visitors, any sounds from the grounds that might bear upon this matter?" Crocker shook his head firmly. "No, sir. The house was locked tight, as always. No one called, and the only sounds were the wind and Sir Eustace's voice when he was shouting at dinner. After her ladyship went upstairs, it was quiet until the scream." Holmes dismissed him with a nod. "Thank you, Crocker. You may return to your duties, but remain within call." The butler bowed and withdrew, his footsteps steady but slow, as though the weight of the night still pressed upon him. As the door closed, Holmes turned to Hopkins, his eyes alight with that peculiar energy that betokened a mind racing ahead. "A credible account," he said, "yet it raises as many questions as it answers." The footsteps he heard, boots heavy and quick, match Lady Brackenstall's description, yet their timing is curious. If the intruder fled as Crocker entered, why did her ladyship not see him, standing as she was by the table, and the candlestick? Take so conspicuous an item, yet leave the decanter, the crystal, the silver tray. Hopkins frowned, flipping through his notebook. "You think the burglary's a sham, Mr. Holmes?" "I think nothing yet," said Holmes, with a faint smile. "But I observe that the facts do not align as neatly as they might. The poker, too, troubles me. A burglar, surprised in the act, might seize a weapon in panic, but this blow was deliberate, struck with force enough to shatter a skull. We must look beyond the obvious, Hopkins." I ventured a question, my mind grappling with the details. Could Crocker be hiding something, Holmes? His loyalty to Lady Brackenstall is plain, and he seemed guarded. Holmes's smile widened, though it held no mirth. "Well observed, Watson. Crocker is a man of depths, and his devotion to his mistress is a thread we must follow. But whether he conceals a truth or merely a suspicion, I cannot yet say. Let us examine the grounds before the light fails. The snow may yet tell us what human tongues will not." Hopkins led us to the French window, and we stepped out onto the lawn, the snow crunching beneath our boots. The cold was biting, the air sharp with the promise of more snow, and as we followed the trampled path toward the road, I felt the mystery of Abbey Grange deepen, its secrets locked within the silent walls and the frozen earth. Crocker's account, like Lady Brackenstall's, was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture it formed was far from clear, and I trusted to Holmes's genius to guide us through the labyrinth of deceit. Chapter 5. A Clue in the Snowther. Winter afternoon was waning as we stepped from the dining room of Abbey Grange onto the snow-covered lawn, the chill air biting at our faces and the sky above a sullen grey, heavy with the threat of further snow. The grounds of the manor stretched before us, a vast expanse of white, marred by a confusion of footprints that radiated from the French window, their outlines blurred by the trampling of constables and servants in the hours since the tragedy. Sherlock Holmes, his cloak billowing slightly in the wind, surveyed the scene with an intensity that seemed to pierce the very fabric of the landscape, his keen eyes seeking order in the chaos of the snow. Inspector Stanley Hopkins followed close. Behind his notebook, tucked under his arm, his expression a mixture of hope and frustration, while I, ever the chronicler of Holmes's methods, braced myself against the cold, my senses alert to the subtle signs that might unravel the mystery of Sir Eustace Brackenstall's death. Holmes wasted no time. Striding to the edge of the window and dropping to his knees, his lens in hand, as he examined the ground with the meticulous care of a naturalist studying some rare specimen. The snow here was deeply churned, a testament to the hurried movements of those who had come and gone in the wake of the crime. Yet Holmes's fingers traced faint patterns beneath the surface, his brow furrowed in concentration. A pity, he murmured, that so many have passed this way. The snow is a delicate canvas, Watson, and it has been sadly defaced. Yet there is something here, something that speaks, if we but listen. He crawled forward, his lens glinting in the fading light, following a trail that led from the window across the lawn toward a line of use that bordered the drive. The footprints, though muddled, retained some semblance of form, and I noted their size and depth, suggesting a man of considerable weight moving with haste. Holmes paused at intervals, muttering to himself, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Here," he said at length, pointing to a patch of snow less disturbed than the rest. A boot size 10, with a worn heel and a slight drag on the left. And here, he gestured to a fainter impression nearby, another, smaller, perhaps a woman's, or a man with a lighter tread. They overlap, Watson, as though one followed the other, or they moved together. Hopkins, peering over Holmes's shoulder, frowned. The larger print could be the intruder's, he said, but the smaller, one of the maids, perhaps, or Lady Brackenstall herself. Holmes rose, brushing snow from his knees, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Possibly," he said, but his tone was non-committal, and I knew he was reserving judgment until more facts were at hand. He continued along the path, his strides measured, until we reached the edge of the lawn, where the tracks converged upon the gravel drive that led to the road. Here, the snow gave way to a thin layer of ice, and the footprints grew indistinct, swallowed by the crunch of gravel underfoot. Holmes knelt again, his lens hovering over the ground, and I saw his lips tighten in a rare display of frustration. "The trail ends here," he said. "The road is well travelled, and any marks have been obliterated. Yet the direction is clear toward the village, or perhaps beyond. Hopkins, have your men searched the road for any trace of the candlestick?" Hopkins nodded, his face grim. "They've scoured it from here to the village, and found nothing. No candlestick, no discarded tools, no sign of a stranger passing through. The snow fell heavily after midnight, which hasn't helped. Holmes's eyes narrowed, and he turned back to the lawn, his gaze tracing the path we had followed. The snow is both ally and adversary, he said. It preserves, but it also conceals. Let us return to the window and begin anew. We retraced our steps, the cold seeping through my boots, and I marvelled at Holmes's endurance, for he seemed impervious to the elements, his mind wholly absorbed in the puzzle before him. At the window, he resumed his scrutiny, this time focusing on the frame itself, where the latch bore faint scratches that had caught his attention earlier. These marks, he said, are curiously superficial. A burglar with a jemmy would have left deeper gouges, yet the latch is bent, suggesting force. It is as though the window was opened to appear forced, rather than forced to be opened. I glanced at him, startled by the implication. You mean the burglary was staged? Holmes's lips curved in a faint, enigmatic smile. I mean only that the facts are not what they seem. Come, let us examine the interior once more. We re-entered the dining room, where the fire had dwindled to embers, casting long shadows across the blood-stained carpet. Holmes moved to the fireplace, his lens trained upon the poker, which still lay where Crocker had described it. He studied the bloodied end, then the hearth itself, where a scattering of ash suggested recent disturbance. The poker was used with force, he said, yet it was replaced with care. A panicked intruder would not pause to set it down so neatly. Hopkins, who had been silent, spoke up. What are you driving at, Mr. Holmes? If not a burglar, then who struck Sir Eustace? Holmes did not answer at once, but crossed to the table, where the decanter and glass stood as Crocker had left them. He lifted the glass, holding it to the light, and I saw the smudge of fingerprints upon its rim. Sir Eustace's, no doubt, he said, but the decanter is half empty, and only one glass was used. He drank alone, then, and heavily, which aligns with Crocker's account. Yet the solitude of his final hours is curious, given the violence that followed. He set the glass down and turned to Hopkins. I would speak with the maids and the cook, if you please. Their accounts, however minor, may fill the gaps in our knowledge. Hopkins summoned the servants, and we waited in the dining room, the silence broken only by the distant howl of the wind. Presently, the maids Marie and Therese appeared, two young women with pale faces and nervous hands, followed by Mrs. Allen, the cook, a stout woman with a red nose and a wary expression. Holmes questioned them with his usual precision, but their testimony added little. Mary and Teresa had been asleep in their attic room, roused only by Lady Brackenstall's scream, and had seen nothing until they reached the dining room, where Crocker was already tending to her ladyship. Mrs. Allen, who slept near the kitchen, claimed to have heard nothing until the maids woke her, and her account of the evening was equally barren. No visitors, no unusual sounds. Only the routine of a quiet household. Holmes thanked them and dismissed them, his expression thoughtful. They know nothing, he said, once we were alone, or if they do, they fear to speak. The household is loyal, Watson, but loyalty can be a shield for truth as well as a bond of service. Hopkins, growing restless, paced the room. We're no closer to an answer, Mr. Holmes. The footprints lead nowhere, the candlestick's gone, and the servants have nothing to add. What next? Holmes's eyes gleamed with a sudden intensity. Next, we return to Lady Brackenstall. Her tale holds the key, though she may not know it herself. I would see her again tomorrow, when her shock has settled. For now, let us retire to the village in the snow has told its tale, and we must ponder its meaning. As we left Abbey Grange, the manor loomed behind us, its windows dark against the snow, and I felt a shiver that was not entirely from the cold. The clue in the snow, faint though it was, had deepened the mystery, and I trusted to Holmes's unerring instinct to guide us through the labyrinth of Abbey Grange's secrets. Chapter 6. A revelation. The morning following our examination of the Abbey Grange grounds dawned with a brittle clarity, the snow no longer falling but lying thick and crisp upon the Kentish landscape, reflecting a pale sun that offered little warmth. Sherlock Holmes and I had spent the night at the village in a quaint establishment of creaking beams and smoky hearths, where Holmes had been unusually silent, his mind evidently wrestling with the threads of the mystery. Inspector Stanley Hopkins had joined us for a sparse breakfast, his youthful enthusiasm tempered by the weight of a case that seemed to defy resolution. As we set out for the manor, the crunch of our boots upon the frozen path was the only sound, save for the occasional caw of a rook circling the bare oaks that lined the road. Abbey Grange appeared even more imposing in the daylight, its Tudor facade a patchwork of weathered stone and dark timber, its chimneys trailing thin wisps of smoke into the sky. The great oak door was opened by Crocker, the butler, whose face, though composed, bore the strain of sleeplessness. He ushered us into the hall, where the air was warmer, but no less heavy with the pall of recent tragedy. Hopkins, eager to resume the inquiry, suggested we speak with Lady Brackenstall at once, and Holmes, his eyes sharp with anticipation, agreed. We were shown to her sitting room, the same chamber of soft roses and pale silk where we had interviewed her the day before. Lady Brackenstall stood by the window, her tall figure clad in a simple black gown, her fair hair caught in a loose knot at the nape of her neck. The bruise upon her cheek was darker now, a stark contrast to her pallor and her blue eyes. The red-rimmed held a resolve that had been absent in our first meeting. She greeted us with a quiet dignity, her hands clasped before her, and bade us sit. Lady Brackenstall, began Holmes, his voice gentle yet firm. We have examined the scene and heard the accounts of your household. Yet there are inconsistencies that trouble me, and I believe you hold the key to their resolution. I implore you, madame, to speak plainly. The truth, however painful, will serve you better than silence. She met his gaze, and for a moment I thought she would demur, her lips parting as if to protest. But then her shoulders sagged, and a sigh escaped her, as though a great weight had been lifted or, perhaps, acknowledged. She sank into her chair, her hands trembling as she pressed them to her face, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You are right, Mr. Holmes," she said. "I have not told you all. I could not, for fear of what it might mean for myself and for another. But I cannot bear this secret any longer. Last night, after my husband struck me, I was in such despair that I did something reckless. I sent a note to an old friend, Captain Jack Crocker, the brother of our butler. He is a sailor, lately returned from Australia, and we were close in my youth, before I came to England. I begged him to come to Abbey Grange, for I feared Sir Eustace's temper might turn even more violent." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with the intensity of a hound scenting its quarry. "And did Captain Crocker come?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, her voice breaking. "He arrived just before midnight through the French window, which I had unlatched for him. We spoke in the dining room, keeping our voices low, for I knew Sir Eustace was still there, drinking. I told Jack of my husband's cruelty, of the bruises, the fear I lived with daily. He was angry, Mr. Holmes, angrier than I had ever seen him, but I begged him to do nothing rash. We were still talking when Sir Eustace burst in, drunk and raging. He saw Jack and flew into a fury, accusing me of betrayal, and he attacked Jack with his fists. Jack tried to fend him off, but Sir Eustace was like a madman. In the struggle, Jack seized the poker from the hearth and struck him just once, but it was enough. Sir Eustace fell, and he did not rise. Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of confession, and I felt a chill that had little to do with the cold. Hopkins, standing by the door, looked stricken, his notebook forgotten in his hand, while I struggled to reconcile the image of the poised, grieving widow with the tale of desperation she now unfolded. Holmes alone remained impassive, though his eyes burned with a fierce concentration, as though each word were a piece of a puzzle falling into place. "What happened then?" he prompted, his tone steady. Lady Brackenstall's hands twisted in her lap, her knuckles white. Jack was horrified. "Mr. Holmes, he hadn't meant to kill him. It was an accident, a moment of panic to save himself and me. He told me to scream, to make it seem as though I had just found Sir Eustace dead. He took the candlestick from the mantel, thinking it might suggest a burglary, and fled through the window. I did as he asked. I screamed, and Crocker came running. I told him nothing of Jack, only that I had found Sir Eustace and seen the window open. Crocker must suspect something, for he knows his brother was in Kent, but he has said nothing." Holmes leaned back, his fingers steepled before him, his gaze fixed upon her with an intensity that seemed to pierce her very soul. "A grave matter, madam," he said at length. "You have placed yourself and Captain Crocker in a perilous position. Where is he now?" "I do not know," she said, her voice rising with a note of desperation. "He said he would leave Kent at once, perhaps for London or to take ship abroad. He promised to send word when he was safe, but I have heard nothing since." Holmes rose, his movements swift and decisive. "You have done well to tell us this, Lady Brackenstall, though the consequences may be severe. I must confer with Inspector Hopkins, and we shall need to speak with Crocker again. For now, remain here, and say nothing of this to anyone else." She nodded, her face pale, and we withdrew, leaving her by the window, her figure a study in sorrow and resolve. As we descended the staircase, Holmes's expression was one of quiet triumph, tempered by a gravity that reflected the complexity of the situation. "The veil lifts, Watson," he said, his voice low. "Her tale explains much, the forced window, the candlestick, the footsteps in the snow. Yet it raises new questions, not least the fate of Captain Crocker." Hopkins, who had been silent, found his voice at last. "Good Lord, Mr. Holmes, this changes everything. If her story's true, it's no murder, but manslaughter at worst. But without Captain Crocker, it's her word alone, and a jury might not look kindly on her." Holmes's lips curved in a faint smile. "Precisely, Hopkins. We must find this sailor, and quickly. His testimony will corroborate or contradict her account, and upon that hinges the truth. I shall send a telegram to Scotland Yard, requesting information on Captain Jack Crocker. In the meantime, let us question Crocker again. His loyalty to his mistress, and perhaps to his brother, may yet yield further light." We returned to the dining room, where Crocker awaited us, his sturdy frame standing by the sideboard, his face a mask of professional calm. Yet his eyes, when they met Holmes's, held a wariness that spoke of secrets guarded, and I sensed that the revelation of Lady Brackenstall's confession would soon test the butler's resolve. The mystery of Abbey Grange had taken a sharp turn, and I trusted to Holmes's unerring instinct to guide us through the shadows that remained. Chapter 7. The Sailor's Trail, the Revelation of Lady Brackenstall's. Confession hung over us like a storm cloud as we stood in the dining room of Abbey Grange, the air thick with the lingering scent of blood and ash. The morning light, filtering through the heavy damask curtains, cast long shadows across the oak panels, and the silence of the great house seemed to pulse with the weight of secrets newly unveiled. Sherlock Holmes, his lean figure taut with purpose, wasted no time in setting our next course. His eyes, sharp and restless, betrayed the urgency that now drove him. For the tale of Captain Jack Crocker, the sailor who had struck down Sir Eustace Brackenstall, had shifted the axis of the case. Inspector Stanley Hopkins, his youthful face creased with the strain of this unexpected turn, stood by the fireplace, his notebook clutched tightly, while I, ever the chronicler of Holmes's methods, felt my pulse quicken at the prospect of pursuing a fugitive whose actions had so dramatically altered the course of our inquiry. Holmes turned to Hopkins, his voice crisp and commanding. "We must act swiftly, Hopkins. Captain Crocker has a head start, and if he is as resourceful as Lady Brackenstall suggests, he may already be beyond our reach. I shall draft a telegram to Scotland Yard, requesting any information on his whereabouts or recent movements. A sailor, lately returned from Australia, is not a man who passes unnoticed. In the meantime, we must scour the village for any trace of him. Watson, your medical eye may prove useful in noting the demeanor of those we question." I nodded, accustomed to Holmes's reliance on my observations, though I confess I felt a pang of doubt as to what I might discern in a village unaccustomed to such drama. Hopkins, rallying his spirits, agreed to coordinate with the local constables, and we made our way to the hall, where Crocker, the butler, awaited further instructions. His sturdy frame stood rigid by the door, his face a mask of professional reserve, but his eyes, when they met Holmes's, held a flicker of unease that suggested he suspected the truth. "Thaw part of it, Crocker," said Holmes, his tone measured, but firm. "We shall require the use of the manor's telephone to send a telegram. See to it that no one disturbs us, and remain within call we may have further questions." The butler bowed, his expression betraying nothing, and led us to a small study off the hall, where a telephone stood upon a polished desk. Holmes composed his telegram with his usual precision, his pen scratching swiftly across a sheet of paper. To Scotland Yard. Urgent. Seek information on Captain Jack Crocker, merchant sailor, lately returned from Australia. Tall, strongly built, likely in seafaring. Attire. May have passed through Kent or London post-midnight, the 31st of January, 1897, possibly fleeing to port. Report any sightings or lodgings. Reply to Chislehurst Post Office. Sherlock Holmes. He handed the message to Crocker, who promised to dispatch it at once, and we set out for the village, the snow crunching beneath our boots as we followed the winding drive. The village of Chislehurst lay a mile distant, a cluster of thatched cottages and a single inn huddled around a church whose spire pierced the leaden sky. The air was sharp, the cold biting at my ears, but Holmes seemed impervious, his mind wholly absorbed in the chase. Hopkins, less accustomed to Holmes's methods, kept pace with us, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Our first stop must be the station," said Holmes, as we approached the village. "A man fleeing a crime at midnight would likely seek the fastest route out of Kent, and the railway is his best option. The porter may have seen something, or, failing that, the innkeeper, Sailors are not shy of taverns, and Captain Crocker may have paused for a drink or directions. The station was a modest affair, its platform dusted with snow and its ticket office manned by a grizzled porter whose face brightened at the sight of Hopkins. "Inspector," he said, touching his cap, "still about that business at the Grange, are you?" "Indeed," said Hopkins. "This is Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, come from London. We're looking for a man who may have passed through last night. After midnight, sailor, tall, strongly built, likely in a pea-jacket or seafaring clothes. Did anyone of that description take a train?" The porter scratched his chin, his eyes narrowing in thought. "There was a fellow, now you mention it. Came in a hurry, just as I was locking up after the midnight train to London. Big man, with a beard, wearing a blue coat and a cap pulled low. Didn't buy a ticket, said he'd pay on the train. Seemed in a rush, kept looking over his shoulder. I didn't think much of it, what with the storm and all, but he was the only one I saw that late." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The midnight train to London," he said. "What time does it reach Victoria?" "1:30, sir, if it's—" "On time," replied the porter. "The snow might have slowed it, but not by much." Holmes thanked him and turned to us, his expression alight with purpose. "A promising lead, gentlemen. Captain Crocker, if it was he, has a 13-hour start. But London is a city of patterns, and a sailor on the run will seek familiar haunts. We must return to the inn and await Scotland Yard's reply. But first, let us visit the tavern. The locals may have seen more than they realize. The village, in a low building with a sign proclaiming it the White Hart, was warm and smoky, its taproom filled with the murmur of farmers and labourers seeking respite from the cold. The innkeeper, a stout man with a florid face, greeted us with a nod, his curiosity piqued by Hopkins's uniform. Holmes wasted no time, describing Captain Crocker and inquiring whether such a man had been seen the previous night. "No sailors here last night," said the innkeeper, wiping a glass with a cloth. "We had a few locals and a peddler who stayed till closing, but no one like you describe. Mind, the snow kept most folk indoors. If your man passed through, he didn't stop here." Holmes nodded, undeterred, and we returned to the inn where we had lodged, a sense of urgency now driving our steps. The reply from Scotland Yard arrived by mid-afternoon, delivered by a breathless boy from the post office. Holmes tore open the telegram, his eyes scanning the contents with rapid intensity. Captain Jack Crocker, merchant sailor, known in Stepney, lodged at the Anchor, Cable Street, until yesterday. Left abruptly after midnight, the 31st of January. No forwarding address known. 2 frequent docks at Wapping and Limehouse. Scotland Yard. Holmes folded the telegram, his lips curving in a faint smile. "He is in London, as I suspected," he said. "The docks are his natural refuge, and a man of his experience will know how to lie low. We must return to the city at once. Watson, Hopkins, you will remain here to ensure Lady Brackenstall's safety and to question Crocker further. His brother's involvement cannot be unknown to him, and he may yet reveal more." Hopkins nodded, though his face betrayed his reluctance to part from the chase. "I'll do as you say, Mr. Holmes. But what of Lady Brackenstall's story? If we find this Captain Crocker, it may clear her, or damn her." "Leave that to me," said Holmes, his voice firm. "The truth is our quarry, and I shall not rest until it is run to ground." We caught the next train to London, the carriage rattling through the snowy countryside as the light faded. Holmes sat opposite me, his eyes half closed, his fingers steepled in thought, and I knew his mind was already navigating the labyrinthine alleys of the East End, where Captain Crocker had fled. The sailor's trail was faint, but it was a trail, nonetheless, and I trusted to Holmes's unerring instinct to lead us to the heart of the Abbey Grange mystery. Chapter 8. The Confrontation. The gaslit streets of London's East End, shrouded in a damp fog that clung to the cobblestones, greeted us as we alighted from the train at Victoria Station and made our way toward Wapping. The hour was late, the city a maze of shadows and muffled sounds, with the distant hoot of a ship's horn echoing from the Thames. Sherlock Holmes, his cloak drawn tight against the chill, moved with the purposeful stride of a hunter closing in on his quarry, his eyes gleaming with the fierce intensity that marked his pursuit of truth. I followed close behind, my revolver a reassuring weight in my coat pocket, for the docks were a rough quarter, and the man we sought, Captain Jack Crocker, had already proven himself capable of desperate acts. The revelation of Lady Brackenstall confession had set the stage for this moment, and I felt the weight of the Abbey Grange mystery pressing upon us as we ventured into the labyrinth of narrow alleys and smoky taverns. Holmes had wasted no time upon our arrival in London. His network of informants, those unseen allies who haunted the city's underbelly, had been set in motion, and by dusk a message had reached us at Baker Street. Captain Crocker had been sighted at the Black Anchor, a dockside tavern in Wapping known to sailors and smugglers alike. The tip came from one of Holmes's irregulars, a sharp-eyed boy who had seen a man matching Crocker's description tool, bearded in a pijacatenta, the tavern an hour before. Holmes, his face alight with the thrill of the chase, had declared it our best lead, and we set out at once, the fog swallowing the clatter of our hansom as we crossed the city. The Black Anchor was a squat, grimy building, its windows dim with soot and its sign creaking in the wind. The stench of tar and stale beer hung heavy as we pushed through the door into a low-ceilinged room thick with smoke and the rumble of coarse voices. Sailors and dockworkers crowded the bar, their faces weathered by sea and toil, and the air was alive with the clink of glasses and the occasional burst of raucous laughter. Holmes, his deerstalker pulled low, scanned the room with a glance, his eyes settling on a shadowed corner where a solitary figure sat, his back to the wall, a tankard before him. "There," he murmured, nodding toward the man. "Captain Crocker, unless I am much mistaken." The figure was indeed imposing, broad-shouldered man with a dark beard, his pea-jacket stained with salt, and his cap pulled low over eyes that darted nervously about the room. His hands, large and calloused, gripped the tankard with a tension that betrayed his unease. Holmes approached with a casual air, as though he were merely a fellow patron, and I followed, my heart pounding with the anticipation of what was to come. "Captain Crocker," said Holmes, his voice low but carrying an authority that cut through the din. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. We must speak with you on a matter of grave importance. Will you come quietly, or must we make a scene?" The man's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of fear and defiance. For a moment, I thought he might bolt, his muscles tensing as though poised for flight. But then he leaned back, his shoulders slumping, and a bitter smile crossed his lips. "I knew you'd find me, Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice rough with the cadence of the sea. "I've heard of you, even in Melbourne. Sit, and let's have this out." We took the chairs opposite him, the tavern's noise fading into a dull hum as I focused on the man before us. His face, weathered by sun and storm, bore the marks of a life at sea. but his eyes held a depth of emotion, guilt, perhaps, or resolve that spoke of the burden he carried. Holmes, his gaze never wavering, leaned forward, his hands clasped upon the table. "You know why we are here," he said. "Lady Brackenstall has told us of the events at Abbey Grange. You struck Sir Eustace Brackenstall with a poker, and he lies dead. The truth, Captain, and nothing less, will serve you now." Crocker's jaw tightened, and he took a long pull from his tankard before speaking. I struck him," he said, his voice steady but heavy. "But it was no murder, Mr. Holmes. I swear it. I went to the Grange at Mary's Lady Brackenstall's bidding. We were friends in Australia before she married that brute. Her note said she feared for her life, and when I saw her, bruised and trembling, I knew it was true. We were talking in the dining room, quiet as mice, when Sir Eustace burst in, drunk as a lord and mad with rage. He came at me, fists swinging, and then at her, like he meant to kill her. I grabbed the poker to fend him off, and in the struggle, I hit him harder than I meant. He fell, and that was the end of it." Holmes's eyes narrowed, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "And the candlestick? The forced window?" Crocker's gaze dropped to his hands. "My doing, sir. I thought to make it look like a burglary, to throw the police off. I took the candlestick and ran through the window, leaving it open to seem like I'd forced it. I didn't want Mary to suffer for my act. I told her to scream, to act as if she'd just found him. Then I fled to the station and caught the midnight train here." "Where did you go upon reaching London?" asked Holmes. "To Stepney first," said Crocker. "I had a room at the anchor in Cable Street, but I knew I couldn't stay. I came here to Wapping, thinking to find a ship bound for anywhere. I've got mates at the docks who'd help me slip away, but I've been lying low, waiting for a chance." Holmes leaned back, his expression inscrutable. "You have acted rashly, Captain, but not without cause. Sir Eustace's cruelty as well. Attested, and your intent was to protect Lady Brackenstall. Yet the law does not look kindly on those who flee. Will you return with us to Kent and face the consequences?" Crocker's eyes blazed with sudden fire. "I'll not let Mary take the blame for this," he said. "If I must face a jury, so be it, but I'll tell them the truth that I struck to save her, and I'd do it again. She's suffered enough at that man's hands." Holmes's face softened, though his voice remained firm. "Your loyalty does you credit, Captain. Come with us now, and I will speak for you. The truth, as you say, is your best defense." Crocker nodded, his shoulders straightening as though a decision had been made. He drained his tankard and rose, towering over us, his presence commanding despite his fugitive status. We escorted him from the tavern, the fog closing around us as we hailed a hansom and made for Scotland Yard. The journey was silent. Crocker staring out at the passing streets, his face a mask of resignation, while Holmes sat in deep thought, his fingers steepled before him. At Scotland Yard, we handed Crocker over to Inspector Hopkins, who had been summoned by telegram and met us with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "You've done it, Mr. Holmes," he said, as Crocker was led away. "But what now?" "His story matches her ladyship's, but a jury may see it differently." Holmes's eyes gleamed with a quiet resolve. "That, Hopkins, is a matter for tomorrow. We have the truth, or near enough, and it is our duty to see it served. Let us return to Abbey Grange and lay the matter before Lady Brackenstall. Her testimony, and Crocker's, will shape the outcome." As we left Scotland Yard, the fog thickened, the city a blur of light and shadow. The confrontation with Captain Crocker had brought us closer to the heart of the Abbey Grange mystery, but I sensed that the final act was yet to come, and I trusted to Holmes's genius to guide us through its complexities. Chapter 9. The truth unravelled. The journey back to Abbey Grange was undertaken in a silence heavy with the weight of recent events. The clatter of the train wheels, a stark counterpoint to the gravity of our thoughts. Sherlock Holmes sat opposite me, his lean frame outlined against the carriage window, his eyes fixed on the snow-draped fields of Kent, though I knew his mind was far from the pastoral scene. The capture of Captain Jack Crocker in Wapping had brought us to the precipice of resolution, yet the path to justice remained fraught with uncertainty. Inspector Stanley Hopkins, summoned from Chislehurst to join us at Scotland Yard, sat beside me, his youthful features etched with a mixture of relief and trepidation, his notebook now filled with the details of Crocker's confession. My own mind churned with the implications of the sailor's tale, which corroborated Lady Brackenstall's account, but cast a shadow of legal peril over both. As the train drew into Chislehurst station, the winter dusk was settling, the sky a bruised purple above the frostbound village. A carriage awaited us, its driver muffled against the cold, and we rattled along the familiar road to Abbey Grange, the manor's gabled silhouette looming against the horizon. The great house seemed to stand in judgment, its windows dark save for a faint glow from the hall, as though it awaited the final act of the drama that had unfolded within its walls. Crocker, the butler, met us at the door, his weathered face betraying a flicker of anxiety as he noted the presence of Hopkins and the absence of his brother. Holmes, with a nod, dismissed him to his duties, his own expression one of quiet determination. We proceeded to the dining room, where the scene of Sir Eustace Brackenstall's death remained as we had left it, the blood stain by the fireplace, a grim reminder of the violence that had set this chain of events in motion. Holmes stood by the French window, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze sweeping the room as though to confirm the facts that now lay before us. "Hopkins," he said at length, his voice steady but resonant, "we have the truth, or as near to it as we may hope. Captain Crocker's account aligns with Lady Brackenstall's, and the evidence, the poker, the candlestick, the footprints supports their story. Sir Eustace's death was no murder, but an act of defence, born of desperation and provoked by his own cruelty. The burglary was a fiction, devised to shield Lady Brackenstall from suspicion." Hopkins, pacing the room, ran a hand through his hair, his face troubled. "I see it, Mr. Holmes, but the law is a stern master. A man is dead, and Captain Crocker fled the scene. A jury may not take kindly to his actions, nor to her ladyship's silence. What's to be done?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with a resolve that I knew to be unyielding. "Justice, Hopkins, is not always served by the letter of the law. Sir Eustace was a tyrant, his cruelty attested by the bruises on his wife's face and the fear in his household's eyes. Captain Crocker acted to protect her, and his flight was born of loyalty, not guilt. We must present the case to the coroner with all the clarity it deserves. Lady Brackenstall must be persuaded to testify fully, and Crocker's statement, given freely, will carry weight." I ventured to speak, my mind grappling with the moral complexities. "Holmes, will the coroner accept such a defence? The candlestick, the forced window, they were meant to deceive." Holmes turned to me, his lips curving in a faint, enigmatic smile. "Deception in the service of survival, Watson, is a lesser sin than the violence that provoked it. The coroner's inquest is not a court of law, but but a forum for truth. If we present the facts plainly, Sir Eustace's brutality, Lady Brackenstall's fear, Captain Crocker's intervention, the jury may see reason. We sent for Lady Brackenstall, and she joined us in the dining room, her tall figure clad in mourning black, her face pale but composed, the bruise upon her cheek, now a deep violet, seemed to underscore the truth of her ordeal, and her eyes, though weary, held a spark of hope as she met Holmes's gaze. "Lady Brackenstall," said Holmes, his tone gentle yet firm, "we have found Captain Crocker in London, and he has confessed to striking your husband in defense of you. His account matches yours, and he is now in custody, prepared to face the consequences. For his sake, and your own, you must tell the full truth to the coroner. Conceal nothing, madame, for the law will judge you both by what you say." Her hands trembled, but she nodded, her voice steady. "I will tell all, Mr. Holmes. Captain Crocker saved my life, and I cannot let him suffer for it. I was wrong to hide the truth, but I feared for him and for myself. What will happen now?" Holmes's expression softened, though his eyes remained keen. "The coroner's inquest will hear your testimony and Captain Crocker's. I will ensure the circumstances of Sir Eustace's cruelty are made clear. The verdict rests with the jury, but I believe they will see the act for what it was, not murder, but a desperate bid to protect." Hopkins, who had been listening, stepped forward. "I'll see to it that the coroner has all the facts, Mr. Holmes. The servant's statements, too, will show what kind of man Sir Eustace was. But I must warn you, the law may still demand its due." Holmes nodded, his face grave. "So be it. But justice, Hopkins, is a higher calling than the law. Let us trust to the jury's humanity." We left Lady Brackenstall to prepare for the inquest, and Holmes, with his characteristic energy, insisted on reviewing the evidence once more. He examined the poker, the window, the bloodstain, as though to ensure no detail had been overlooked. "The case is clear, Watson," he said, as we stood by the fireplace. "The footprints in the snow, the superficial scratches on the latch, the candlestick's absence point to a staged burglary, but one born of necessity, not malice. Captain Crocker's loyalty to Lady Brackenstall drove him to act, and her silence was meant to protect him. The truth is unravelled, and now it must be laid bare." The inquest, held the following day in the village hall, was a sombre affair. Lady Brackenstall, pale but resolute, recounted her tale of fear and desperation, her voice breaking as she described Sir Eustace's violence and Captain Crocker's intervention. Crocker, brought from London under guard, stood tall and unrepentant, his confession plain and unadorned. The servant's testimony painted a grim picture of Sir Eustace's temper, and Holmes, called as a witness, presented the evidence with a clarity that left no room for doubt. The jury, moved by the weight of the truth, returned a verdict of justifiable homicide, and Captain Crocker was released with a caution, his act deemed a defence of life rather than a crime. As we prepared to leave Abbey Grange, the manor seemed less oppressive, its shadows softened by the resolution of its secrets. The truth, as Holmes had promised, had been unravelled, and I marvelled at his ability to navigate the tangled threads of human passion and deceit to reach it. Chapter 10. The aftermath. The resolution of the Abbey Grange affair left a quietude in its wake, as though the ancient manor, having borne witness to violence and revelation, now exhaled a sigh of relief. The snow that had blanketed the Kentish landscape began to melt under a tentative sun, and the air, though still sharp, carried a hint of spring's promise. Sherlock Holmes and I stood in the hall of Abbey Grange, preparing to take our leave, the weight of the past days settling upon us like the dust motes that danced in the slanting light. Inspector Stanley Hopkins, his youthful vigour restored by the coroner's verdict, was overseeing the final formalities with the local constables, while the household, freed from the shadow of suspicion, moved with a subdued efficiency. The truth, so fiercely pursued, had been laid bare, and yet, as I glanced at Holmes, I sensed that his mind lingered on the nuances of the case, as though some final thread remained to be tied. Lady Brackenstall met us in the hall, her tall figure clad in mourning black, her fair hair drawn back in a simple knot. The bruise upon her cheek, though fading, was a lingering testament to the cruelty she had endured, but her eyes, once clouded with fear, now held a quiet strength. She extended her hands to Holmes, her voice low but fervent. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I cannot thank you enough. You have saved more than my life. You have given me hope and a chance to begin anew. Captain Crocker is free, and I am free of my tormentor. I shall never forget your kindness." Holmes bowed, his manner grave but softened by a rare warmth. "It is enough, madame, that justice has been served. You have shown great courage in speaking the truth, and I trust you will find peace in the days to come. Should you have need of us, you know where we may be found." She nodded, a tear glistening in her eye, and turned to ascend the staircase, her figure retreating into the shadows of the manor. I watched her go, my heart stirred by the resilience of a woman who had faced such trials, and I wondered what future awaited her in the wake of this tragedy. As we stepped onto the drive, the crunch of gravel underfoot replaced the snow's muffled tread, and Holmes lit his pipe, the familiar scent of his tobacco mingling with the crisp air. Hopkins joined us, his notebook tucked away, his face alight with admiration. "Mr. Holmes, that was masterly work," he said. "The way you pieced it together, the footprints, the window, the candlestick, was like watching a puzzle come alive. I'll not forget this case, nor your part in it." Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile, though his eyes remained distant. "You did well to call us, Hopkins. Your instinct for the unusual served you, and the truth, though complex, was not beyond reach. See that you continue to trust your judgment. It will carry you far." We climbed into the carriage that would take us to Chislehurst Station, and as Abbey Grange receded behind us, its gabled roofs fading into the winter haze, I ventured to break the silence. "Holmes, did you suspect Captain Crocker from the outset, or was it Lady Brackenstall's tale that set you on his trail?" Holmes exhaled a cloud of smoke, his gaze fixed on the passing fields. "Not from the outset, Watson," he said. "The footprints in the snow were my first clue too. Sets, one heavy, one lighter, suggesting a pursuit or a meeting. Lady Brackenstall's account, so precise in its details of the candlestick and footsteps, yet vague in others, hinted at a rehearsed narrative. Her hesitation, her guarded glances, told me she shielded someone. When Crocker, the butler, spoke of his loyalty to her, I began to suspect a connection beyond the household. The sailor's identity emerged only with her confession, but the shape of the truth was clear from the snow onward. I nodded, marveling at the clarity with which he had navigated the case's complexities. "And the verdict, do you think it just?" Holmes's eyes narrowed, and for a moment his face took on that stern resolve I knew so well. "Justice, Watson, is a delicate balance. Sir Eustace's cruelty provoked his fate, and Captain Crocker's act, though rash, was born of necessity. The law might have demanded more, but the jury saw the human truth behind the act. That is justice enough. The train to London bore us swiftly through the countryside, and as the fields gave way to the sprawl of the city, I reflected on the strange alchemy of Holmes's methods, his ability to distill truth from deception, to find order in chaos. The adventure of the Abbey Grange truth had revealed not only the depths of human cruelty, but also the courage of those who dared to defy it. And I felt a quiet pride in having played my small part in its resolution. Back at Baker Street, as we settled before the fire, Holmes took up his violin, the strains of a melancholy air filling the room. I knew his mind was already turning to the next challenge, but for now, the case of Abbey Grange was closed, its secrets laid bare, and I contented myself with the knowledge that justice, in its truest form, had prevailed. The end.